If I could just ask the first question of Lisa. Lisa, you gave an excellent talk just saying. I just wonder, you've listened to Phil and Jenny, whether you've got any questions or comments on the two.
I did, and I've written them down. One of the concerns I have as a nurse is getting teachers to inject insulin. I've trained over 3 years. I can't give it without double checking with someone else. We know it's one of the top 4 high risk medication areas in our health services where it's double checked. I don't know the answer to it. I don't know where it sits with parents providing the training. That to me seems a risk.
As a clinician, I probably agree with you. As a bureaucrat, I guess my reflection on that is parents give insulin all the time. I don't think schools are hospitals or medical centres, and we don't have medically trained staff in all schools. However, if that is a genuine, and the third point is that the experts who we've been dealing with to date in the department haven't raised that as an issue. If that is actually a valid issue that you think needs addressing, we have a process in place now that I am very comfortable to sort of raise that as an issue and to try and come to some resolution around that. And if that means that that's what will require a ministerial order, or that is what will require medically trained staff in a school environment or whatever it is, if that, there will be clearly government implications about that, around that. But I'm very open to really exploring that as an issue and a problem, and trying to come to some solution that is the best solution for a massive system, because we are talking about 3,000 schools across the state of Victoria. God knows how many childhood services. 70,000 students in every year level. But we're talking about 3,000 kids. So, but we are talking significant numbers. And so we did calculate that if we had a school nurse in every school, it would cost us something like $40 million a year. So it's a huge budget outlay. And so it has enormous implications. Nevertheless, that does not mean, and it's one of the things that I would like to try and clarify with this next iteration of the policy and the implementation of the policy, is what are the requirements, what are the safety issues, what is the best practice here.
If children are having injections of insulin at school, the two main means of giving an injection is either through an insulin syringe, drawing the insulin up out of a vial, or using an insulin pen where there is no need to be drawing anything up. And for those of you who haven't seen it, it looks literally like a pen, and there's a dial at the end where you dial up a number, so that the accuracy with which somebody who is relatively inexperienced in administering insulin will be a lot easier using a pen. Most children and young people who are on insulin regimens that require insulin regularly at school, because I think there's a big difference between a one-off extra injection because somebody is unwell and high and has ketones. I think that's a very different scenario if they're not normally having injections at school, versus having an injection on a regular daily basis. If they're having a daily injection, most children would be having those injections via a pen. So I think practically the ability of somebody to administer that with relatively little previous knowledge and education, I think is something that could be overcome. And obviously parents come into diabetes with somebody who's newly diagnosed, never having given injections before, most often, unless they've got a nursing or medical background, so that people we know for sure are able to be trained up to be able to administer injections. So using an insulin pen in a school environment is something that I think people could be trained to do. And in terms of the double checking system, certainly having somebody double check, have I dialed, the plan says I need to dial up 4 units of insulin, this is 4 units of insulin and it's not 40 or it's not 14, and having 2 people check that. I guess it would come down to the practicalities though, from a cost perspective. Should we be training teachers up who are general members of the community, similar to families, and then there is a double check system where there's 2 members of staff who are trained up. That would be a potentially cost-effective means of managing to get the injections across, perhaps. I mean, it's very complex, obviously, and there's going to be a whole lot of discussions, but is there a challenge? Is there a problem? And how do we overcome it? In my own experience, I think that we've got some children who are able to give their injections even down to prep and grade 1, amazingly. And some people, in my experience, who I've had an 18-year-old many years ago who had to hold a sheet of paper over her abdomen so that she couldn't see where the injection was going as her parent gave the injection. So they're the two extremes, that we've got a great prep child giving his own injections and an 18-year-old can't even look at a needle. So majority of kids from prep through to grade 3 or 4 may not be able to give their own injections. So sometimes we'll make a decision clinically. We're going to go with twice daily injections so they don't have to have an injection at school. And if we did have the easy ability to give an injection at school, we might actually change our management. We might not, because we still might choose to give 2 injections. But I think there'll be some children who would be benefited from having the ability to have those injections at school. And so I think it'll be small numbers that will be changed, but for those small numbers it could have a big impact.
I just want to add, we met last week and there were 2 consumer stories that came through. There's going to need to be a lot of actual training around this, if this is the approach that we're going. One child was treated with insulin for his hypo at school by a teacher. She got it wrong. And other children, if the trained teachers are not at school, they're not allowed to go to school. They're being asked to be kept at home. So if we're training teachers or a person at the school, what is the backup if they're away? Is it the expectation that you have to keep your child at home? Certainly for me, when Charlie wasn't allowed to go on camp, I was working in Melbourne and he sat in Ballarat by himself at home. Is that the safer option?
I agree, but I guess our expectation in terms of the policy is that there are enough staff to make sure that that child's education is not disrupted in any way.
Thank you. Now, questions from the floor? Okay, at the back.
Hi, my name is Diana. I'm a maternal and child health nurse currently. I do have a history of having been a diabetes educator. I also have raised 2 children, one who developed type 1 at the age of 14 months of age. He's now 28. My question to Jenny is, surely there would be a lever as private schools get funding from, I think it's federal government. Surely that could be a lever to pull private schools in line. I must edit that with saying we actually moved our son out of the public system because he was being severely bullied by the school, and we moved him into a private system after researching it very well, and he told me this morning he still has really good memories of that private school. So, you know, but the question is about...
I'm sorry I can't see you, but...
I've got a fractured ankle, so I'm not...
That's okay. I'm glad your child had a good primary school experience. One of the issues, I guess, as a state bureaucrat, is I can really only influence what the state is able to do. So in terms of the federal funding, yes, it sort of is, it traverses through the state, but that it means working with our Commonwealth colleagues to take that on as an issue as well. Now, my experience is that with, every school has the best of intentions. When you talk to them, every school has the best of intentions. And again, we hear stories of some schools doing it, supporting kids with diabetes absolutely beautifully, really beautifully, and including an individual, sort of anecdotal examples of kids who I know or friends, children of friends of mine. And we have absolute horror stories. And as I guess when somebody who is responsible for influencing the system, my job is to try and make sure that I can reduce that variation to ensure that there's quality and safety, for the masses right across the whole system, rather than having these pockets of excellence and pockets of disaster. So we will hopefully try and learn from some of those pockets of excellence. We're going to try and get some of those principals in and ask them what they do and what they do well. to try and inform, the work of the development of the guidelines as we move forward as well. But in terms of the Commonwealth issue and the Commonwealth funding, and that as a lever, it's a very difficult lever for the state system to actually use.
Can I just say, Diane, one thing I'm absolutely grateful for is my son was diagnosed at the age of 12 and not at 14 months. I can't simply imagine what that would be like to parent, and I don't think the parents of children in kinders and primary schools can work. It's too hard to work, and it's hard enough as a teenager, but I take my hat off to you. I think you've done an amazing job.
Questions?
Sorry, I'm standing behind a pole at the moment. This is aimed at Lisa. Firstly, thank you for speaking about the challenges that you've had. I think for all the medical staff here, nursing and school teachers, that's very inspirational for us to learn how it actually affects the family side. So thank you very much. I just have a question in regards to, you spoke about some of the challenges of the transfer from using injections to pumps. What are actually the advantages of transferring to a pump for Charlie?
Certainly, he can eat when he wants. He doesn't have to eat at a specific time. If he wants to sleep in, he can sleep in. He doesn't have to get up and have breakfast. He plays basketball, and he's just started with a team that played at 10:10 on Monday night, which is delightful, working out blood glucose levels, because he generally hypos somewhere between 3 and 6 hours after he's done it. But we can reduce his basal rate on the pump and let him rest. He can disconnect for a couple of hours while he plays sport, and if he's sick, we can reduce the rate, or we can increase the rate accordingly. We said, do you want to go back to injections? And we've had a bit of difficulty with the Medtronic lines, and he absolutely said no. Now, I know it's not for everyone. I know some people don't like being attached to it, and I think that's personal choice, and I think that's fine. We will keep up our private health insurance to make sure that we can pay for it. It's an expensive computer, but for him, it was life-changing for him.
Yep. Chris.
Yeah, g'day, Chris Cooper, paediatrician from Geelong. Jenny, given that the Department of Education recognises diabetes as a disability, is there any discussion about funding each and every child with type 1 diabetes under the Disabilities and Impairments program?
Yes, there has been a lot of argument about that, and I'll call it an argument, partly between me and the other manager, and arguing that we do need to support these students. What the bit of the department that funds the program for students with disability will say is that it is already under enormous strain. It already it will fund some students with disability, but they really have to, it's usually young people who have a comorbidity, so they need to have some complexity to their disability, so they won't fund, just straight out, if there is ever the sort of thing as run-of-the-mill diabetes, sort of a simple diagnosis of type 1 diabetes does not qualify. However, a young person who might have type 1 diabetes and autism spectrum, or type 1 diabetes and something else, or very refractory type 1 diabetes, or very, sort of complex requiring multiple admissions, or something else, they might consider it. But the problem with adding 2,500 students to the program for students with disability is that it would blow the budget. And actually in Victoria, we currently have we fund about 4% of students with complex disabilities under the program for students with disability, get individual funding, and we are the highest in the country. Other states tend to fund 2%, we fund 4%, and we know that there are about 11% of kids who actually have a disability diagnosis of some kind, and so it really just becomes a question of how do you make the dollars, sort of have the greatest good for the greatest number. What the program for students with disability team would also say is that schools are actually given the individual funding of students with disabilities is one aspect of the work they provide funding for. So there's a whole lot of money that gets given to schools under a disability, if you want to call it disability guise that actually school goes into the school budget through what's called the SRP. So the SRP is the Student Resource Package, and schools are expected to provide support for their students who have additional needs that don't qualify for the program for students with disability. And that's in the order at the moment of about $120 to $130 million a year. So that does go into the government system, and that is supposed to provide support. So when a school does have a child with a disability, that is supposed to provide. A school is supposed to budget through that bucket, because they get that as a sort of a bucket grant. They don't get it attached to an individual child. And we know, again, the system has been such that there's always been a bit of a devolved governance. So, we can provide all the policies, but schools get ultimately the responsibility lies with the principal. And so the department can't hold them to account over how they use that budget. So it's something that we will continue to argue and continue to work with, Chris. But at the moment, I'm losing the argument. Let's just put it that way.
Gail Schuller from Ballarat. Just building on that disabilities thing, just wondering whether there's any option. I know it's probably federal funding, but whether there's any option for a lifelong healthcare card to help that transition from childhood into adult, and funding for diabetes consumables like insulin, just getting the insulin funded.
I don't think I can actually answer that question, because that is definitely a Commonwealth deliberation, and I don't really know enough about the disability space to be able to talk to that, but Lisa, I might.
Currently, healthcare cards are funded to the age of 16, and then after 16, your type 1 magically disappears. It reduced the cost. We didn't know that Charlie was eligible for a healthcare card for about 12 months, and the cost is quite a lot. Pump consumables aren't subsidised. Insulin, really, prior to the healthcare card, we're adding about $5,000 a year to keep him alive. It's about half that with the healthcare card. If a child's diagnosed with diabetes after the age of 16, they're not eligible, but I think we should be able to apply for hopefully an ongoing one for Charlie. If they're diagnosed under the age, and I think it's either 9 or 10, there's a catastrophic allowance you can apply for. The parent should be encouraged to apply for, but you've only got about 3 months, and they've got about $7,000. But it's really expensive to keep them alive. We have said to Charlie that we will always pay for his medical supplies, and we've set up a separate bank account to do that.
Just add to that, just one correction actually, which is that the healthcare card is available up to 16, and if you have a child, and I might get the terminology wrong, but a carer's payment or allowance, it comes with a healthcare card. At the age of 16, that payment typically cuts off, but there is actually a way to get a healthcare card from 16 up to 25 when you have a specific list of criteria, and that is you've had a healthcare card under 16, which is sort of nonsensical, because if you're 16 in 1 month, you don't fit that category. So the 16 and 1 month old struggles, but the 15 and 11 month old who did get one is then still eligible up until 25, until such time as they're in full-time employment. But one of the difficulties that we'll face, and Anton may touch on this in his talk shortly on transition, we talk about transition, but it's an ongoing evolution over time. And although I talked about adolescence, pretty much everything I talked about in how to help that young person do what they need to do, you can make that the 20-year-old or the 22-year-old or the 25-year-old really. And for those of us who are beyond 25 or 30, there might still be parts of our lifestyles that we still might need to be working on in an adolescent phase. So I think we need to assist the government in recognising that you need access to that. For, I think personally, if there was a time limit, 25 years or 30 years, to get somebody out from their family supports and really be out there as an independent functioning adult. If the logic is that they're going to be in higher educational studies and then early years in their work, if something has to give, like I talked about earlier, what is one factor why somebody may not do what they need to do and have agreed to do? It's the financial constraints. So if you're going to spend your hard-earned money on going down the pub with your mates and buying a few beers, or spending it on that bit of extra few blood glucose testing strips and ketone strips, again, I know which one is going to win out almost all the time. So we need to assist them. It's not that we want to support everybody going down to the pub spending all their money, but it's the reality of the situation. So how we do that, it's advocacy, and it's all of the different groups. And one thing I was going to come back to Jenny about is the complexity of all of the systems. We've got federal, we've got state, we've got independent, we've got the Catholic school system. And when we as individual clinicians and teams have a situation where there is a real struggle in a school, where we're really trying to help them, sometimes we struggle to know how to sort of follow through the pathways, because each of the systems has their own different rules and systems. And I've only recently discovered through DAV, Diabetes Australia Victoria, that there's an advocate specifically who's spending a lot of her time supporting these issues in schools. And if I haven't heard about it after this long, then I think a lot of us might not know about all the different little things. So one positive into the future with our plans might be having a structured part of the website to say, just a one-stop shop. If you're having difficulties with your school, whether it's the parent, whether it's the school, whether it's the medical team, you go to this spot and it starts taking you through how to work your way through the system.
Question? Over here. Back.
Hello, my name's Desley. Lisa, I think this is to you. You mentioned that your son missed out on a basketball trip overseas, so it's obviously very important to you. I've had a parent, I'm a school nurse, who's addressed that situation with me before. Do you think it's something that could be put into the health support plan early on before that arises? The fact that if this came about, we have this set in place? Because I think as a young man, to miss out on something like that could be life-changing.
Yeah, look, the criteria for the basketball program was good academic grades, commitment to school basketball, and that was really it, which he's played every year. He's made the elite team, most valuable player in his year level. They didn't say that was the reason why he missed out. We put down that his dad was willing to go with him and that we would fully pay for as well. The letter just came back that there were more children than had applied, and unfortunately he was unsuccessful on this occasion. With the camp, 6 weeks out prior to the camp, with the PEDS team, they wrote a beautiful camp plan, and I went in and educated all the staff, met with them all, and we had everything in place. I'd contacted the camp to see what meals were being served. We'd organised to have sugar-free cordial and alternate options for him, and it wasn't until 5 to 5 on a Friday night, he was due to leave for camp on the Wednesday, that they rang and said he couldn't go. So you can put the best plans into place, and you can have the forms filled in, but if and it's a Catholic school, so it doesn't fit under the public school, it makes it really challenging. You can have the best plans in place and they don't go ahead. Now with the basketball program, I haven't challenged that because he's still got 2 years of school, and I don't know what that means for him, so we've let it go.
Yeah, well, the parent approached me and said, do we get to the point that we say we pay for a nurse to go? They want their children to have options, and they don't want that to be the deciding factor.
Yeah, we've got a situation with camps that the children are allowed to go, the parent goes with them, but they're not allowed to stay on site. They have to stay in a separate room. The issue with Charlie with camp was the teachers going in. The plan said to wake him up at 2 o'clock to check his own blood glucose. That was an issue with the teachers. They felt they couldn't wake at 2, so we moved it back to midnight. The issue of having 2 teachers coming in with a lot that's gone on in the Catholic system, and then they wanted us to go, and I said, I don't have a parent working with children check. I'm not sure how the other parents would feel about me rocking in, let alone my son with me in my pyjamas. He's not going to want his parent on a camp. So there's still a lot of work to be done, and there's one mum who came with the group last week whose child's anaphylactic and type 1, and her challenge is if he collapses in the playground, what are you going to do? What do you treat? I don't know the answer to that. What happens if you give, that's a question, do you do a blood glucose first, or do you give adrenaline straight away? What do you do?
So the immediate life-threatening problem in somebody who's collapsed, if they have both of those, is the anaphylaxis. And the first primary treatment would be administering the treatment for that, so adrenaline. And if you find somebody collapsed and you don't know anything about them, but they've got an EpiPen and a glucagon pen, you're going to choose the EpiPen. because that will act immediately and will be life-saving. Glucagon is an important strategy, there's no question about that, but the likelihood of harm acutely from hypoglycemia is much less, I would argue, than the likelihood of the anaphylaxis. Having said that, you're giving one and then very quickly you're giving the other, but if you have to choose between the two, I would go for the adrenaline every single time for that reason.
Is there any further questions? Just while you're thinking, if I can just ask Jenny, if a parent rings the department and says that the particular school is not compliant with the diabetes management plan, what next? What can your department do about that?
It's often not a parent that rings the department, but the issue has come to us either through Diabetes Victoria often, so the advocate will call up and go, oh Jan, there's another school, there's another issue. Occasionally it will come through as a piece of correspondence to the Minister, so we've had a number of complaints directly to the Minister, which is, I'm very comfortable with families going straight to the Minister, because I think the more they're aware of the reality of the existence of, of the families with, children with diabetes, the better. But what we tend to do is one of my staff, in a region, the way that the department works, both the health department and the education department, is that there are central office staff, so I'm one of the central office staff, and then there are regional staff. And so in the region, there are what we call disability regional coordinators, and there are health and wellbeing coordinators in the education part of the regional staff. And what we try and do is we try and involve the regional staff and get the regional staff who are responsible for that school, or for that school area, to go into the school and talk about the issue. Now, that said, in 2012, as part of all the cost cutting that the government went through, they pretty much gutted the regional capacity. They cut something like 40% of regional staff. So, and we're only just in the process now of trying to get some more capacity in the regions. And so there are lots of staff who don't have a history of how all these processes work. So we need to be a lot clearer about, and some staff are not that confident in doing that. So technically what does happen now is that my staff will often call the school, get a sense of what's going on, work with that regional staff member to actually be the person that does, takes the issue on individually. So we try and push it back to the proper process in the department for complaints, the proper process for dealing with health and wellbeing issues at an individual level. So that my team is really responsible for the policy and for thinking about the implications for implementation. We're actually not responsible for implementation, in fact. There's another part of the department that's responsible for implementation. So the system is a great big system with cogs and wheels, and at the moment, because the system perhaps does not work as well as it could with respect to health conditions, we will often take an individual decision to go straight to the heart of the matter. But what I'm trying to do is to set up a process so that we actually involve the correct players that are closer to the school and are responsible for the school working properly. And that is in an individual case, for parents, if you have an issue at your school, you should be able to ask to speak to the regional disability coordinator, who should be able to take a responsibility for that, or to speak to the area director or the SEAL, the student improvement education leader that works in that school. So there is a process and a hierarchy of regional staff who will take on an issue. And my job is to help work through that.
Thank you.
And the guidelines will make that process much clearer.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
G'day, I just want to put a shout out to Lisa because she put a shout out to Ballarat Health Service, and on behalf of everyone here, to say you're a great mum, so well done. It's okay. Just this conversation reminds me very much of paediatric palliative care, and I sort of want to draw some parallels to it. And within our scope, I think we're all medical here. Paediatric palliative care over 20 years that I've been in, 25 years been nursing, we haven't done brilliantly, but we're starting to get better at it. I think we're asking a sector to work outside their scope in some ways. So I think Jenny's got a big job ahead of her. But the parallels are, and I think what we've done well in paediatric palliative care and have changed just in recent times, is working on that guideline. But I think, paediatricians, nurses, allied health have been afraid of kids dying, and I think we're asking teachers and a different sector to work in our field of, a medical scope to some degree. So I think we need to be aware of that and be patient, have those guidelines in place, but also that education, I think, is imperative. And if we can, slowly but surely support them, I think we can get there. But it feels like to me, diabetes in schools is about where we were with palliative care 20 years ago, where kids all died in hospitals and we told parents what to do. So advanced care plans now engage families. We've obviously diabetes, we'll be engaging families, but we've got we're about a decade behind, I think, when it comes to that in comparison to that palliative care. So be patient. I think the schools are on board and we're getting there slowly.
Thanks, Clinton. One of the reflections, I guess, is that advanced care planning in terms of legislative frameworks is only just now coming into, sort of catching up, so for young people. Thinking about the legislative framework that supports students with diabetes in schools and early childhood services is certainly part of this process, but I have no way of knowing, how that will go. We're really at the beginning of that, the beginning of that journey.
In terms of the interactions with the schools, I think in your talk you mentioned the fact that the school has to comply with the department's plans, but I'd actually still argue that when we're dealing with the school, it's very much like dealing with a family or dealing with the adolescent. Most of the schools, as you quite rightly said, every school, I think, has the absolute best of intentions. When they've got that young person in their care, they want to provide a safe environment for that young person and for all the other kids around them. And if we don't understand what the issue is with the school in providing that safe environment, what is the barrier to that one young person going on the school camp? What is the problem? What is the difficulty in them doing their injection in the classroom rather than being sent off to another location? If we don't get inside the head of the school and understand what it is, because each school is going to have a different issue, and they will be saying, oh, well, we've set this up for this other family, and they might have 4 kids in the school with 4 different families, obviously, with 4 different requests, and one saying, I want my child to be having their injection in the classroom, and I want my child to be having their injection away from everybody else in the nurse's bay or whatever it is. And so the school is having to juggle all of that. So I think that, again, we all just need to work together as a team to get the right outcome and always individualise it. That's where the difficulty that the department faces, I think, is when it gets to a mandatory requirement that comes down from the minister. Sometimes it won't necessarily be the best outcome for the individual. I think the mandatory requirement is that there needs to be support and integration and a plan that works best. But sometimes what the team wants or what the family wants is practically just not going to be the best thing for the child in that school environment. So we've always just got to compromise and work together in the same way that we do to change behaviour for the kids.
Can I just add, I think most of us are medical here, so we look at schools as approaching things the same way that we do in the medical profession, and they don't. They've got a different approach. We hand over one patient from one nurse to another, one shift to another. The assumption is that you would think they'd hand over from one teacher year level to another teacher year level. So you go from year 9 to year 10, but yep, Charlie's a type 1 diabetic, and this is what it means. That doesn't happen. The onus is back on the parent. You meet with the teachers again. He said to me last week, or one of the teachers thought I was wagging the media. I said, why is that? Why, mate? Were you? Because he could have been. And he said, no, I had a hypo and I was treating at my locker, and it looked like, and it did look like he was hovering around at his locker for 40 minutes, which he was, because it took that length of time to come up. But it hadn't been handed over to that teacher, despite me going into the start of the year and saying he's a type 1 diabetic. What does that mean? So I've reinforced it again that they send the information around. There seems to be no escalation strategy. We have that. We know how to escalate a deterring patient in hospitals. It's common nature. We look at root cause analysis. We go back to where something went wrong. The schools don't think that way. They're not used to thinking that way. So we have to put a different hat on and help them. You do escalate, okay? If you've got a type 1 diabetic, do you have a spare glucometer at the gym? Do you know how to use it? Are you relying on the child's glucometer? Because they're all going to be different. Charlie's got a pump glucometer that doesn't test for ketones. So have you got a separate pump that tests, a separate glucometer that tests for ketones? They're all different. Do you know how to use it? Are the batteries up to date? Simple things, maybe a little trial. If you have a child collapse in the gym, what do you do? They don't think the same way as we do, and we can't assume that they do, so we've got a bit of work to do.
I'm not a diabetes expert, so I don't know that as a clinician who'll be leading this this work, whether I'll be able to anticipate all the issues that will rise. But my understanding or my expectation, I guess, is that these guidelines should be able to set out some of these issues. And I guess we will be looking to work with the experts, we'll be looking to work with consumers, we'll be looking to work with the school sector to try and work out how much can we anticipate, how much can we put on paper, how much can be done that is good general specific advice, if you know what I mean. So it's general but it's actually specific, that can be used for all young people and not around individual young people. And the individual stuff for each individual child, we still have to rely on the health support plan and the diabetes and action and management plans to have the detail of the content. And what I'm hearing is that we probably need to add, escalation into those plans, and we're very willing to do that.
Okay, thank you. And one last question.
Hi, thank you for that. My name's Ollie. I work as a school nurse, probably one of the biggest Catholic colleges in Victoria. And my suggestion or question would be, is there any sort of thought about some online training like anaphylaxis and then verify the EpiPen, epilepsy essentials, asthma training to the asthma-friendly schools? So I think for my school that works really well, but I'm not sure what the thoughts are about the future.
That's one of the issues that has come up, and we're very open to that. So we have recently worked with the Epilepsy Foundation, and I don't know whether it's been launched and whether I'm allowed to talk about it yet, actually. I should know this, but I don't. But we've supported them to develop an online education package for health for schools and early childhood services around epilepsy. And we're actually in discussions with, we've had some certainly Diabetes Victoria doing a very good job of advocating with the department about the need for online education for diabetes for diabetes, type 1 diabetes. And so that's something that we're very open to. It will be part of this process at looking at what the education and training needs are for schools, and it's certainly something that is on our radar. Now, I have no money for it, I have no authority for it yet, but it's something that we're certainly considering.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.